voting rights bill in the Senate last
But
week.
it takes 60 votes to repair the ceiling of our democracy by passing voting rights legislation. I'm left to conclude that if the issue is important enough, the Senate feels compelled to act. Well, let me say that I believe that the democracy is at least as important as the economy. Recently, many of our colleagues have argued that legislation to protect voting rights somehow offends our federal system of government and amounts, they say, to a federal takeover of elections. Some of the same voices, ironically, who have extolled Dr. King's life this week have at the same time been working vigorously against the legislation we're debating today to protect the right to vote, and many of them have been channeling old states' rights arguments. Let the message go out. You cannot remember Martin Luther King Jr. and dismember his legacy at the same time. You can argue whatever side you want, but you do not get to argue both sides. I will not sit quietly while some make Dr. King a victim of identity theft. You do not get to offer praises and plaudits in memory of Dr. King and then marshal the same kinds of states' rights arguments that were used against Dr. King and against the civil rights movement. Please know that as the pastor of Dr. King's church, this argument evokes, I say really respectfully, it evokes some of the darkest moments in our country's long struggle for equality.
That was Senator Raphael Warnock of Georgia talking about the demise of the voting rights bill in the Senate last week. Ironically, last week was also the birthday of Martin Luther King Jr. Our guest in this half hour is Charlie Cook, the nation's foremost political prognosticator. Charlie is the founder of the Cook Political Report and a political analyst for NBC News and a columnist for the National Journal. Charlie, welcome back to Deadline DC.
Thanks for having me on, Brad.
Always a pleasure.
That clip of Senator Warnock makes you think, really wonder about where we're going as a democracy. It's deeply troubling.
Yeah. Where are we? Well, that's a good question, Charlie. Let's start with that. Where are we going as a democracy?
Well, I have always rolled my eyes when I've heard people worry about where we're going and where the process is. But I have to tell you, for the last year, 13 months, I have grown quite concerned, and it's between the Stop the Steal and what happened on January 6th, it's really worrisome. But I worry that what is happening is that we are seeing faith, confidence in the election process sabotage, undermined, which sort of threatens when you get down to the basics of what is a democracy based on? Rule of law, free and fair elections, peaceful transfer of power, and you have to believe in that the election is, you have to believe in what the results are. And I've heard certainly with former President Trump, but also with Democrats lately, it's they're undermining public confidence about something that hasn't happened yet. I mean, certainly there are Republican legislators and elected officials that are trying to keep the turnout of certain groups down. Absolutely, it will be for a lack of trying, but we're coming off of the highest midterm election turnout since 1942, and the highest, since 1900, and the highest, highest since 1914, and the highest presidential in 2020 since 1900. And I worry that Democrats and progressives are playing into this erosion of confidence in our elections without having seen any evidence that it's been undermined at all yet.
Well, let me ask you that. I mean, we had a record turnout in 2020, but it seems to me, rather than celebrating it, many Republicans are threatened by it. 19 states have enacted voting restrictions since 2020 election. And shouldn't we always be trying to expand democracy instead of limiting it? Doesn't that undermine confidence in the voting system?
Well, as I said, we've seen since I would say since 2011, 12, 13, we've seen various elected officials, Republicans, that have been trying to kind of whittle down the turnout among certain groups. No question about it. And there's been absolutely no evidence that any of it has worked till now. And that while, yeah, some of these people are working overtime, and Democrats should, or anybody ought to be fighting it. But at the same time, when you're fighting what is being attempted, you don't want to undermine confidence in the election process as it is, because then it's sort of playing into, well, elections don't matter, and it's whoever comes out on top comes out on top. And it's when you think of what some of the efforts that the Russians were trying to do with us, they were trying to undermine faith in our democratic process, and this is. And as I said, it's not for lack of trying on the Republican side, but Democrats need to be careful with what they say. Otherwise, they will be eroding it as well.
Well, what should Democrats say about the attempts to restrict voting that have occurred after the 2020 election? Should they just, take it and accept it and hope for the best?
No, you fight it, but you fight it without eroding confidence. It's basically, you put spotlights on the sort of more outrageous things. For example, eliminating drop boxes. I mean, there's nothing heinous about having drop boxes for early for early votes. And we've had so many times where how about this? The statistics on how few there is virtually no voter fraud in this country, and yet I doubt if many of your listeners would know how few when George W. Bush's Justice Department tried to find voter fraud cases, they had a 5.5-year effort and came up with practically nothing. Or what about the number of prosecutions for voter fraud during the 4 years of the Trump administration? There's not any. Or William Barr's statement, 3 weeks after the election, that he saw no evidence of anything that would change any outcome of the election. I mean,
Charlie, I'm going to have to interrupt you because we're going to take a very quick break here. We'll be back with more of Charlie Cook, founder of the Cook Political Report.
I want to get back to seeing my grandbabies every Sunday and smothering them with big hugs and kisses.
Welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. Our special guest in this half hour is Charlie Cook. He is the founder of the Cook Political Report and a political analyst for NBC News and a columnist for the National Journal. Charlie is here to talk about Joe Biden's first year in office and Democratic prospects in the midterm. Charlie, last time I checked the Real Clear Politics average, Joe Biden's approval rate was down to 41%. There are a lot of nasty indicators. Uh, how would you evaluate Joe Biden's first year in office?
Oh, it hasn't been good, and it's sometimes. I mean, I don't want to be mean because I've known him a long time and I like him a great deal. I think he's a person of a really good, solid person and enormously experienced and all that. But I think if you were going to come up with one sentence, you'd say overpromise and underdeliver. And while a lot of people are focusing on the under-delivering part, I would argue that the bigger problem was the overpromising. That you can't try to do the biggest expansion in the social safety net in a half century with practically non-existent margins in Congress. I mean, people forget. I mean, FDR had 59 Democratic senators, and there were only 96 in the Senate in those days. LBJ had 68. You look at the House. FDR had 313. LBJ had 295, and Biden and Democrats have 222. These were just not realistic. As wonderful as so many of these agenda items are, and they a lot would do a lot of good, but when you become president, it's like you're given a credit card, and the size of the credit limit is determined by how much did you win by, and we're not talking national popular vote, we're looking at states, and how big are your majorities. And the agenda was just totally disproportionate to the victory. I mean, gosh, the presidential election was effectively settled by fewer than 126,000 votes. The Senate by fewer than 55,000. The House by fewer than 32,000. No matter how good these things are, if you don't have the majorities to get through, then you're just raising the expectations, the hopes of your base, and then you're going to disappoint them. And that's like what we saw in the NBC poll, where there's like a 13, 14 point gap in enthusiasm between Republicans and Democrats right now. And I think it's a self-inflicted wound.
What do you think? We'll get into this in the next segment, but what would your advice be for Joe Biden going forward?
I think you find some way to credibly hit a reset button and just sort of start all over. And the thing is, they're talking about cutting up into pieces the BBB. Well, the thing is, there were a lot of people urging them to do that from the very beginning. I mean, that's what they should have done.
Okay, Charlie, I'm going to have to interrupt you again. We're taking another short break. We'll be back with more of Deadline DC after this break. Welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Banner. My guest in this half hour is the nation's foremost political prognosticator.
Prosecutor.
Yeah, that too. We've been talking about the first year of Joe Biden's presidency. Charlie, you were saying before we went to break that it's time for Joe Biden to do complete reset. How can he do that?
Well, I don't know how you put the genie back in the bottle, but he, I do think you basically take the elements of his the BBB, take some individual elements and try them just one at a time, and just trying to do. I mean, it's trying to put Humpty Dumpty back together again, but I don't know anything else. I don't know anything else you do, because it's sort of the damage has been done. I just think they've gotten themselves into a really bad place, and it wasn't for a lack of warning. As I said before, it was just a disproportionate to the size of the victory. I mean, that Democrats just barely won. that 2020 election, and yet came up with an agenda that was, incredibly good stuff. But it was what you do after you've had a landslide and with giant majorities like FDR and LBJ had. So, but how do you do that now when the damage is done? I don't really know.
Let's try this. The related question is Republicans are openly talking about what they're going to do when they take control of Congress after the midterm elections. Should they be so confident?
Well, I think I've thought for a long time that whichever party this election is about, they're likely to lose. And to be frank, if the election is about President Biden and the Democratic majorities, then Democrats are going to have a bad night. If it's about Republicans, if it's about Donald Trump, then that could have a better outcome. Or if it is about Republicans nominating really flawed candidates in competitive races, that to me, to save the House requires either A, divine intervention, or B, Republicans self-destructing. Well, I think B is a lot more likely than A, and that can come in the form of either A, of nominating exotic, crazy candidates, as Republicans did, blowing 2 Senate races in 2010, and again 2 more in 2012. Back during the Tea Party days. So it's that, or former President Trump basically creating a civil war within his party, trying to purge the party of anybody that isn't completely loyal to him. So I think Democrats have to make this election about Republicans, and that's not easy, to make a midterm election about a party that's no longer in power. But I don't know that they have any choice.
Okay, let's look at the Senate side. Right now, there's obviously a dead even split in the Senate between Republicans and Democrats. What are the Senate races in 2022 that we should be looking at?
Well, that's what's got to be pretty scary for Democrats, because if you look at the 6 closest states in the presidential race, all 6 of them have highly competitive Senate races. And you ran a clip of Senator Warnock in Georgia. Biden won Georgia by a quarter of a percentage point, fewer than 12,000 votes. Arizona, 0.3 of a point, fewer than 11,000 votes. Nevada, a little less than 2.5. I mean, that's where Warnock, Mark Kelly in Arizona, Catherine Cortez Masto in Nevada. You've got Republican open seats in Pennsylvania, North Carolina. I skipped over Wisconsin, where Ron Johnson. In a bad midterm, 3, 4, 5 points can shift, from the previous presidential very, very easily. And this is a map that is very, very vulnerable for Democrats. I mean, it's 9 out of the 12 closest races in the presidential race. 9 out of 12 of them have competitive Senate races. And the problem is, if Democrats have a net loss of, say, 1 seat, drop to 49, or 2 at 50, or 2 at 48, 47 if it's 3, in 2024, there are 23 Democratic seats up, only 10 Republican seats. Democrats could find themselves in a really deep hole a deep hole going into 2024, and an even deeper one coming out of it. And that's why this is so ill-timed to have something like this going on. But Democrats ought to have a decent chance in Pennsylvania and North Carolina, and under the right circumstances, even Ohio. But if there's an undertow for Democrats, they're not going to be picking up those Republican open seats, and their chances of knocking off Ron Johnson, who ought to be incredibly vulnerable, go down as well. So there's never a good time to have a bad election, but this is a really bad time to have a bad election.
Okay, let me ask you one last question. Um, again, I started regularly watching the network news shows at 6:30 Eastern Time at your urging, and looking at it, I haven't. You know, I don't drink, but I often think about drinking very hard when I'm watching the network news. Uh, is the system up to you hear stories about, COVID, overwhelming hospitals, school shootings, natural disasters. Is the political system prepared to cope with these crises that Americans see on the network news every night?
Frankly, I think part of the problem is the people that aren't seeing the network news in the evening. I mean, that I would have a hard time understanding some of the denial, for example, about the coronavirus and about, mask wearing and something like that. For anybody that watches, whether it's ABC, CBS, or NBC, it's the people, though, that have walked away and have turned off sort of mainstream media. They're the people that are skeptical about all these things. I mean, and that's ironic that the people that are screaming so badly about wanting things to go back to normal, they're the people that are keeping it from getting back to normal. But it's the people that have basically tuned out, sort of mass media, broad-based media, and have retreated into just getting news from their own comfort zone, which in some cases it's downplaying.
Charlie, I'm going to have to interrupt you again because we're at the end of the half hour. Thanks very much for joining us. Our guest in this half hour was Charlie Cook, the founder of the Cook Political Report. We'll be back right after these messages.
Hey, Dad, how do airplanes fly? What's in this box? Can I touch this?
I'm sorry to bum
Where
out
does
all your
sand
listeners,
come from?
but
Is this tree good for climbing?
that's why I say going down that.
What happens if I mix these two things together?
Yep.
Going down that rabbit
We're
hole.
Thanks,
babies,
Charlie. I hope you get your internet
What
back
does this
soon.
thing do?
Okay, see
Kids
ya.
are curious
Bye.
about everything,
care. Bye.
including
Thank you.
guns.
Bye.
Talking to them about gun safety in your home is a good first step, but you can do more.
Okay.
Always keep your guns locked, unloaded, and stored separately from ammunition. Storing your guns securely is the best way to prevent family fire, including unintentional shootings. For more information on safe gun storage and ways to keep your family safe, visit endfamilyfire.org. That's endfamilyfire.org.
What do we keep in the attic? What's this thing called? Can I ride my bike backwards?
Like I said, kids are curious. It's up to us to keep them safe. Brought to you by End Family Fire,
Okay.
Brady, and the Ad Council.
Right now, our country feels divided, but there's a place where people are coming together.
I gotta tell you, I was nervous to talk to someone so different than me.
Me too, but I'm glad we are.
Love Has No Labels and One Small Step are helping people with different political views, beliefs, and life experiences come together through conversation, and it feels good.
Wow, your story is so,
Interesting?
yeah.
When people actually sit down, talk, and listen to one another, they can break down boundaries and connect as human beings.
Tara.
At lovehasnolabels.com
Tara.
/one small step, you can listen to amazing,
I can
life-changing
not hear her, though.
conversations and find simple tools to start a conversation of your own.
I know one thing. This conversation gives me hope.
It gives
I'm
me
sure
a
she's
lot
saying
of
something
hope too.
profound, but
Take
I
a
can't
step
hear
toward
it.
bringing
I can
our
see her,
country
though.
and your community together by having the courage to start a conversation at lovehasnolabels.com
Maybe
/one
we
small
don't need
step.
audio for
A message from
Tara, 'cause I think we
StoryCorps,
can,
Love Has No Labels,
see
and the
what
Ad
she's
Council.
saying from her, expressions on her face.
As Lyndon Johnson used to say about
Maybe
special
Karen Jr.
interests
Jr.
trying to
pulled out
get
one
his
of the
support to
plugs.
pass some blatantly self-serving legislation, they can't make chicken salad out of chicken shit. Yet, chicken shit is all that the corporate health complex has to work with, as it frantically tries to defend its current system of mass malpractice known as corporate health care. After all, as most Americans have learned the hard way, The corporatized care of profiteering insurance giants, big pharma, and hospital chains grossly overcharge us while constantly trying to shortchange or outright deny care to millions of our families. So, unable to win public support on their own merit, the corporatists and their hired political hacks are going all out to continue their gouging and keep control of America's dysfunctional system. They're now running a multi-million-dollar PR and lobbying campaign of lies to trash and kill all reforms that would deliver quality, comprehensive care to everyone at far less cost than they can deliver. Masquerading as a partnership for America's healthcare future, the profiteers warn ominously that such reforms as Medicare for all or a public option for health insurance would take away people's choice and our control over healthcare. Hello, we presently have no choice or control. Our care is managed by a handful of insurance, drug, and hospital monopolists whose primary objective is not improving our health, but feathering their own cushy nests. And the undeniable ugly truth is that they can only continue ripping us off by killing real reform.
I can't hear you.
This is Jim Hightower saying that's one reason the American Medical Association and others are dropping out of the partnership's political front. Honest healthcare practitioners no longer believe it's in their interest or the public's to be part of its chicken PR campaign.
Yeah, but I don't hear you. I don't hear you. One, two, three, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. I hear you. I hear you.
Yay!
It's a little echo. I mean, I have a little bit of an echo, but if you don't hear the echo, it's okay. Okay. Yeah, I don't know what. Okay, great. Wonderful. Yeah. Yeah, we'll deal with these.
Welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Banton. It is the second half hour, which usually means it's time for the provocative progressive political panel. This half hour is brought to you by my company, Bannon Communications Research, which polls for progressive issue groups, labor unions, and Democrats. Your signs for Democrats are as clear as your blue water off a Caribbean beach. Democrats who ignore the peril are simply whistling past the graveyard. More than half of the public disapproves of President Biden's performance, and most Americans feel the country is headed in the wrong direction. But poll-driven predictions of disaster are not guarantees of Democratic failure. The president and congressional Democrats still have time to turn things around. We're still in the first quarter of an election year, and there'll be lots and twists and turns with the buzzer sounds at the end of the fourth quarter, sort of like yesterday's NFL playoff games. To win the midterms, Democrats need to highlight President Biden's accomplishment, hold Republicans accountable for their contributions to the nation's problems, and erect a firewall between national GOP transgressions and direct democracy at the state level. You can read the rest of this column and all my columns to The Hill at thehill.com/person/Brad-Bannon. Now it's time for the provocative progressive political panel. Today's guest panelist is Tara Devlin. Tara is a New York City-based comedian and host of the unapologetically liberal podcast Tara Buster. You can follow Tara at Twitter at @RealTaraDevlin. Joining Tara on the panel is progressive political activist Mark Grimaldi. Mark has worked for several Democratic presidential candidates, including Joe Biden. He's also active in campaign finance reform and efforts to promote cancer research. His Twitter handle is Mark J. Grimaldi. Welcome, panel. Let's start off with you, Tara. What's wrong with American politics?
I believe, honestly, it's, in my opinion, it is the root of all evil is money in politics. It all comes down to that. We wouldn't have a Kristen Sinema. We wouldn't have a Joe Manchin problem if it weren't for the built-in bribes, the legal bribes that the Supreme Court built into our system. And nobody asked them to. Just like nobody asked John Roberts to mess with the Voting Rights Act. There wasn't a big uprising to do away with the pre-clearance part of the Voting Rights Act. He just took it upon himself, like Republicans do, and they never have a mandate. I was listening to you talk to Charlie Cook, and yeah, I mean, I guess I understand he's more, I mean, maybe more mainstream or whatever, but from where I'm sitting, this is what I think we really have a big problem. If the Republicans are successful with their dirty tricks, and it's not just about getting the vote, because even just, for example, in Arizona, and Kristen Sinema, I know, is aware of this, the laws they're trying to pass are so restrictive that they will be successful. I mean, one of the laws is that you need a fingerprint and a passport to register to vote. A fingerprint and a passport, or documentation on your citizenship. I mean, it's just so blatant. They're not even pretending anymore that they're not suppressing the vote, and it is driving me insane. That, and the other part of the destruction is the corporate media, and they're invested in the coup or not. Either way, they're going to be just fine. They make a lot of money pretending the establishment and everything is business as usual. I was just watching Morning Joe, and I was watching the news shows over the weekend too. The way that they were framing just saying that Joe Biden's approval ratings are so low and this is disastrous and whatnot, but his low is not even near what Trump's high was through his 8 years of the presidency, of the so-called presidency. And then they were talking about how Democrats they're kind of breaking even in the polls for congressional seats. This is what I heard on corporate media. And but the Democrats have to overcome a 5% disadvantage due to redistricting and whatnot. And they just threw that in there like it's normal. This is the way it should be. The fact is, this is the tyranny of the minority, and they know it. The Republicans don't. They see the writing on the wall. They are doing they're attacking the pillars of democracy everywhere you look, and including unity, for God's sakes. You know, you think about the fact, I mean, well, okay, I have so many thoughts, and they all want to come out of my mouth at the same time.
Amen, sister. It's true, though.
Yeah, I often have that
it's
problem.
just driving me nuts. Like, for example, the way they're framing Kristen Sinema's, FU to voting rights as she's a maverick. This is her baloney frame. She's not a maverick. You know what would be a maverick? It would be that she would not be so obsequious to her corporate donors, because she certainly meets with them, and everybody doesn't know. Nobody knows what the hell she wants, what she's doing from one day to the next. She's clearly somehow, she's not a maverick. She's really self-serving and self-seeking. So that they're not reporting that Sinema, we're not talking about blowing up the filibuster. This is what they're framing it as. It was this one rule change for voting rights this one time. Okay, that is the filibuster change that they're saying she was so beholden to the traditions of the Senate, which really the traditions are Jim Crow, because it's not getting any better. So that's the thing with the corporate media. It really feels like they're in on the coup, in my opinion. So,
Mark, do you want to bring us out to the next break? The Voting Rights Act and Build Back Better both got killed since the first of the year. What should Democrats do now? What should Joe Biden do now?
I think that you know, what you were talking about in your piece, first of all, I completely agree with Tara. And if you have a pulse, I mean, honestly, and care about this democracy in its entirety, it's not hyperbole. She's right. When the one sentence that I would key in on is Republicans, including Donald, you know, especially Donald Trump, but also his followers in Congress, are attacking every pillar of democracy. We just learned through the January 6th committee that there was an executive order drafted to start seizing voting machines through military power. So this is not hyperbole. This is not theory. There's hard evidence that this was happening. And, you know, of course, Republicans didn't even want this committee. So that's the type of threat that we're facing. So Democrats have this, you know, extraordinarily difficult job to make sure our democracy still exists after the next election and its consequences, but also B, sell those voters that Charlie Cook talked about in the last segment who don't even know what's going on. And if they did, then maybe they would have a better idea that the things they're complaining about, like inflation and gas prices, have very little to do with what President Biden has been doing or not doing. The bigger problem is what we're talking about, is the voting rights of Americans, regardless of their political affiliation, being taken away, and fighting for those voting rights, and for the fact that also, so that's your protect democracy, protect the pillars of democracy. And on the other hand, as you talked about, Brad, make progress for those who are paying attention or not through the Build Back Better bill. So they have to somehow achieve talking to both of those audiences while fighting the wave of being channeled into this, you know, extremely corporate media that is very conservative and very pro-corporation. I can't tell you how to do that in 30 seconds till break, but I have a couple ideas if you want me to when we come back.
Me too. Let's.
Okay, well, maybe we can talk about that after the break.
Yeah.
We'll be back with more of Deadline DC with Brad Bannon and our provocative progressive political panel with Tara Devlin and Mark Grimaldi right after this brief stop.
What I know about courage, I learned from my adoptive mom. She said sometimes you just gotta hold on and know we'll get through this.
Brad, you are good to go.
I still have you. Yes.
Okay. Welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. Today on the Provocative Progressive Political Panel, our guests are Tara Devlin, the host of Terror Buster, and Mark Grimaldi, our executive producer and progressive activist. We've been talking about Joe Biden. We've been talking about the demise of the Voting Rights Act. Let's start with this. Tara, we've got about 10 months until the midterm elections. It's pretty clear that we're not going to get much out of the Senate. We may get elements of Build Back Better. I'm not even too terribly optimistic about that. So what should Joe Biden and Democrats be focusing on for the rest of the year?
Well, I appreciate what Joe Biden said. He's going to take the case to the American people. What I hope for is, you know, they say nobody elected him to be FDR. The hell we didn't. The fact is, and we know this is what Joe Biden needs to start hammering. The American people know this, whether they know it innately or not, that the United States is now the least upwardly mobile of all the Western democracies. I mean, that's a shocking, sad statistic, and that we know we're living in it. The majority can't save $400. 80% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. This is not the recipe for democracy. It's actually the recipe for autocracy, and that's what we see going on. And Joe Biden, what bothers me about the Democrats, and I am a Democrat, is that they want to be all things to all people. Stop courting these Republicans. They haven't been playing the game of democracy since I think since Reagan. It's God. He should have learned from what happened with Obama. The fact is all the bills that pass in the House, I think they 4% pass through the Senate now are actually signed. 4%, when it used to be over 50%. So, and that's not long ago. It's in my lifetime. This has happened. But I really want Joe Biden, and I hope they do, that they adopt unapologetic talking points. Stop apologizing for being correct and being on the right side of history. The American people know we need a new deal. Pick up the mantle. Say we're picking up FDR's mantle. Start saying we will bring FDR's new, what was it, the Second Bill of Rights to fruition. All of these are in our history, in our great American history, with when we built the middle class. I mean, the Democratic Party built the damn middle class.
Well, let me ask you this, Tara.
Yes.
A lot of people in Washington believe. I mean, the reality is,
right,
41% of the American public think that Joe Biden's
exactly
a good president.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people are basically urging Biden now to do the exact opposite of what you just suggested, which is the reason his job approval is so low, is that he's been too ambitious.
Brad, we got to come back.
We're going to go to break, but we'll be back for Deadline DC after this message.
All right, Brad, you are good to return to both radio and live stream.
We're back with more of Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. Our guests on the panel today are Tara Devlin, the host of Terror Buster, and progressive activist Mark Grimaldi. Tara, what advice would you give to Joe Biden? I mean, most Democrats, a lot of Democrats are basically telling him that he was way too ambitious, given the fact that he had a 50-50 split in the Senate and a bare majority in the House. What would you say to that?
Well, the fact that he has that slim majority is because the American people they don't trust the Democrats to bring it home, really. That is what I think. And it's too much trying to be everything for everybody. You can't be the darling of Wall Street and the darling of the American people at this point. Wall Street is doing great. It's time for the American people to join in on the party. And that's the foundations of democracy. And in my opinion, the American people want somebody who will fight unapologetically. And you see look at Trump. He never apologized, and he was always on the wrong side of everything, and a horrible, horrible person. So they want people who have the courage of their convictions. And to me, that's what I see. That's what's making me very concerned, is that I knew that they would spin it as you were going too far left. That's baloney, because the Build Back Better plan, as you know, has over a 70% approval rating with the American people. Now, once again, just like with Obamacare, they don't like the name Build Back Better. They don't like it. Like Obamacare, they hated Obamacare, but they loved the provisions, And it's the same thing. The American, they want to pay $35 for insulin. They want to have health care. They want to have child care. This is not outrageous. How about some days off, for God's sake? The entire world is looking at us with rolling eyes. What's wrong with the American people? We are, I guess, I don't know what it is. Maybe we have been, you know what it is. I know what it is. It's the media, because the media keeps hammering these messages that Joe Biden is too far left. Now, the people going to work, going to their 3 uniquely American low-paying jobs with no retirement or benefits, they're not paying attention. They're seeing the headlines. They're seeing Biden's got a low approval rating. People hate his plan and all of this. And that where we know the nuances, we're reading it. Now they're saying, oh, Kristen Sinema's a maverick. for standing up for Senate tradition. Baloney. Baloney. No, was anybody calling for her to save the filibuster for this one bill besides Mitch McConnell and the rest of the Republicans? So we if we wanted to, we needed to have voting rights restored. And the other thing is, this wouldn't even be happening if not for the Supreme Court. It's like all connected. And I really wish that Joe Biden, too, would connect the dots. I hope he does and start channeling FDR.
I hope he does connect the dots, too. Mark, what advice would you have for President Biden? I mean, we're pretty much in campaign mode here because not much is, if anything's going to come out of Congress for the rest of the year. We just learned that in the last couple of weeks. What advice would you give the president?
Right.
Yeah, I suspect you're going to see that. I think you're going to see Chuck Schumer put a lot of the individual elements up for a vote. Insulin packages, prices, child care, with the full knowledge they'll probably get defeated in the Senate, but I think Schumer plans to do that is force everybody to vote on these things, so everybody knows where everybody in the Senate stands. Uh,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's very true, Mark. I
Right.
took a close look at those exit polls from the 2018 election, and the biggest single issue which drove the Democratic success in the 2018 midterms was concern about health care. That was the number one issue for voters, and the voters who said health care was their big issue voted for Democratic congressional candidates by a 3-to-1 margin. Uh,
Right. Right.
That was also the
Exactly.
other very popular
Exactly.
item
And
about the
everything in the
Build Back
bill.
Better program.
Mm-hmm. But I just want to give the Democrats some messaging because we're always saying how they stink. When they asked Joe Biden about going too far left, he needs to respond with, "We're not going too far left. We are building the infrastructure of democracy," and there you go. Because it's a patriotic imperative that we balance the scales and give the American people a shot at the American dream that the billionaires seem to have well in hand. You know, they can go up in space and look at the big blue marble and tell us how wonderful it is. But, you know, we're trying to have a day off to go to a damn doctor without worrying if we have to declare the uniquely American medical bankruptcy. You know, there is so much we have to do. But first, it really does start with the messaging. And it is very frustrating that the Democrats have to embrace it without apology. I really believe that. So I don't know. Right. Oh, God. Right. Yep. Yeah. Right. 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 Exactly. That's why people they're saying the Democrats are disaffected or the base or whatever. That's why. Just like you said, Mark, people they don't feel that the Democrats are truly in their corner. And then you hear Nancy Pelosi saying, "Oh, that she's all good with senator and House members trading on stock." Like nobody wants to hear that, you know. And right, exactly. Yeah.
And
And
that will be the last thing, Mark, because we're running
sure.
out of time. Thanks to our guest, Charlie Cook, founder of the Cook Political Report, Tara Devlin, the host of Terror Buster, and progressive activist Mark Grimaldi. Be safe and be strong in these troubled and turbulent times. Leslie's back tomorrow, and make sure you watch Deadline DC live Mondays at